When we talk about castration, it isn't true that knives were the only instruments used. Through history, people used axes, heavy stones, boiling animal fat and other weights to crush the genitals. Daggers and blunt tools were also employed, and in some places entire mechanical devices were devised to inflict slow, unbearable damage. Beyond these, there were even more horrific methods, so cruel and strange that many have never been widely heard of. While many civilizations used castration to punish or control, ancient Persia employed a method that turned torture into a deliberate performance. Instead of cutting, they used crushing, a slow destruction of the organs that guaranteed unbearable pain long before death arrived. This wasn't merely about preventing reproduction, it was a public reminder that defying power meant surrendering every part of oneself, including the ability to breathe without agony. This punishment was often reserved for spies, enemies of the state, or soldiers who betrayed their commanders. The victim was tied down, usually on flat stones in a courtyard where officials and witnesses could observe everything. His legs were forced apart and held still by soldiers, not out of necessity, but so every spasm of his body was visible, every instinctive attempt to curl away from what was coming. Executioners placed heavy stones or metal devices over the testicles. In some cases, a wooden beam was set across the crotch and weighted down gradually, using additional stones to increase pressure. The idea was not to kill immediately. It was to keep the victim alive long enough to feel each stage of destruction. Internal tissues ruptured first. Nerves screamed. Blood vessels burst. The body reacted violently, gasping, shaking, convulsing, while soldiers forced the man to remain still. Historical texts describe the sound, a muted crack from inside the flesh. The torture ended only when the genitals were completely destroyed. If the victim survived the initial crushing, death soon followed from internal bleeding, shock, or infection. Survival was never the goal, suffering was. Castration in Imperial China was not simply a punishment, it was a state-controlled industry. At the height of the empire, the Forbidden City demanded thousands of eunuchs to serve the royal household. These men had direct access to the emperor, and for that, the palace wanted them completely stripped of sexuality, legacy, and ambition. Castration became a tool of loyalty. The procedure was known as gongxing, the removal of what the Chinese described as the three treasures, the penis and both testicles together. It was performed quickly, often by experienced cast surgeons or eunuchs themselves, and always without anesthesia. A wooden clamp was tightened around the base to slow the bleeding. Then a short, sharp knife did the rest. Records describe the pain as overwhelming enough to cause men to faint or go into shock instantly. Many did not survive even the first minutes. Once the genitalia were removed, they were wrapped and kept in a small sealed box. This was not a sentimental gesture. Tradition held that a man had to be buried whole to enter the afterlife as he once was. Without that box, a eunuch believed he would remain incomplete even in death. The wound was packed with paper and ash or salt, and the man was locked in a room to see if he would live. If the urine flowed again within 3 days, he had a future, though a bleak one. If not, infection and internal swelling would end his life in brutal silence. Beyond cutting and crushing, one of the most calculatedly cruel methods used in history combined scalding liquids and red-hot implements to ensure prolonged agony and a high likelihood of fatal infection. This technique appears across different regions and eras under various names, but its logic is always the same, not merely to remove function, but to make the body remember the punishment forever. The victim is bound and exposed in a public space so that the act itself becomes a performance. First, the executioners pour boiling water, oil, or animal fat onto the groin to blister and destroy the skin and soft tissue. The immediate effect is not a clean amputation but a slow, unpredictable disintegration. Nerves are seared, tissues char, and the body generates intense, systemic shock. While some victims die quickly from the trauma, many remain conscious long enough to experience the long, racking spasms of pain that follow. The sight and smell, fumes of burning flesh, the hissing of hot liquid on skin, serve as grim theater meant to deter. After scalding, hot irons or red-heated blades are pressed against the remaining tissue to cauterize or further mutilate. Sometimes this is done to prevent immediate bleeding and create a permanent, grotesque scar. Other times it is used deliberately to leave fragments of destroyed tissue that will fester and invite infection. In some documented instances, practitioners would then apply corrosive substances, salt, ash, or even chemical irritants known at the time, to prolong agony and make medical recovery nearly impossible. What makes this method especially savage is its layered cruelty. Scalding destroys the surface, cauterization ruins deeper structures, and the addition of contaminants converts what might have been survivable into a likely death sentence. Even if the victim survives the initial procedure, the combination of sepsis, gangrene, and organ shock often leads to a drawn-out death days or weeks later. Those who lived carried both physical and psychological scars, the smell of burned flesh, the constant pain of improperly healed wounds, and the social marker of humiliation that followed them everywhere. Rulers and judges who sanctioned such methods used them for a reason. They were the ultimate demonstration that bodily integrity, and therefore identity and lineage, was at the mercy of political will. In that calculus, slow, visible suffering was a tool to consolidate power by seeding terror. In medieval Europe, castration became a legal weapon designed not just to punish the body, but to destroy honor. Society believed masculinity was tied to virtue and control. Removing a man's genitals meant removing his status as a husband, a soldier, and a human being with dignity. Crimes involving sexual violation, treason, or challenges to noble authority often ended with this specific form of brutality. The justice system wanted to send a message not only to the criminal, but to every witness gathered around the execution site. The punishment was public by design. A wooden platform was erected, often in the center of town or directly in front of the victim's own community. The condemned man was forced to stand before neighbors, family members, and even children, who were brought to learn the consequences of sin. Shame was part of the sentence. The crowd's silence was heavy disgust mixed with fascination as guards tied the prisoner's arms behind his back and spread his legs open to the audience. Executioners used different methods depending on region and judge. Sometimes it was a sharp knife, fast but crudely handled. In harsher episodes, a heated blade or burning iron was used to both cut and cauterize, making survival more likely but recovery agonizing. Medieval records describe victims collapsing from shock as the iron touched skin, a scream instantly swallowed by the roar of the furnace flames nearby. By the time the crowd inhaled from the smell of burning flesh, the man's future as a husband or father had already ended. One recorded case from 12th century England describes a nobleman accused of betraying the king. His punishment included castration and blinding, removing not only his masculinity but also his ability to ever witness the world again. Chroniclers note that such penalties were meant to remove the danger of a man forever.